When FDR began his turn, he's going to have to deal with the banking crisis immediately. So the first thing he does, first of all, he's inaugurated on a Saturday. And on Sunday, he actually enacts a 4-day national banking holiday that would begin on Monday. All banks were supposed to be closed on Monday by the order of the federal government. He had the power to do this under an old World War I law. Then he called Congress into special session, and while it took time for Congress to meet, it was already meeting by Thursday of that week. So think about it. For 4 days, you could not withdraw money or write checks from your bank account. How do you suppose that the businesses were going to do without banks? It's estimated that Americans took out $1 billion out of the banks, those, of course, that could get to the banks before they went broke, and they put that $1 billion and they stuck it in mattresses or buried it in backyards in tin cans. Places went back to bartering. When Congress met, the Roosevelt administration was ready with proper legislation. Now, as you can imagine, the Emergency Banking Act is something quite complicated, so I'm going to have to break it down to something simple. What it came down to was basically proposed the governments inspect the banks, beginning at the very top and working their way down. Government inspectors would go in and look at the bank's conditions. They would look at their books. Banks that were deemed strong enough to survive were given loans to prop them up. Those that were not given, how are they going to get that money? Well, they were going to get money from the Reconstruction Finance Corporation that was started under Herbert Hoover. Remember, FDR didn't touch it. Those banks that could not survive, they were liquidated. Everything was sold, even the building. People would get back so many cents on the dollar for their loan, for their accounts. Now, what is this proposing to do? Is this socializing the banking system? No, absolutely not. The government is helping to get the banks back on their feet. It is to save the banking system as a private enterprise. There's so much confusion about this, but it's important. This was absolutely opposite of being a socialist, but people will still say that FDR was one. Look what he did to the banks. The banks ruined themselves, and FDR closed them for a while in an effort to save them. People were really upset in some locations. For example, in Elysian Fields in Texas, at the local Spock-style bank, Elysian Field State Bank, it had a sign that stood back all the way into the 70s. And literally it said, did not close during Roosevelt's banking holiday. They believed in their bank. Now, this bill was introduced in Congress, and Congress met at noon. And just for fun, how long does it take for a bill to go through Congress and meet and basically reach the president's desk for his signature? A long time, right? Months. This one went in at noon, and it was on the president's desk for his signature at 9 p.m. that night. No shortcuts either. The entire legislative process. They would even use a rolled-up newspaper to represent the bill while they were debating it on the floor. Now, even though it only had enacted only a 4-day national banking holiday, that was really enough time to get all the banks ready to go and to be open. So basically what FDR is going to do is he's going to go on the radio. Remember, there's no TV during this time period. People who had it were very wealthy, but many people had radios. So he would go on the radio and address the people in national radio addresses. They call them fireside chats, right? And basically stick where your TV is now and just replace it with a radio. It's next to your fireside, isn't it? Anyway, he would talk to people and explain what they would do. And you know what? It worked, because when banks started to reopen on Monday, people were starting to bring back their money. People were bringing some of that money from their backyards, underneath their mattresses, and putting it in their banks to deposit, because the President of the United States said that these banks were stable enough to go. Private enterprise banking, was saved in 8 days of the FDR administration. Now, to go along with this, there's going to be a reform of the banking system. And, of course, we live with it today. There are going to be restrictions on what a bank can do with another person's money. But one reform that's very important to this day is known as the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Basically what this is it's an insurance program that your bank is a part of. And by the way, if you ever join a bank that is not in the FDIC, run away. Join one. Anyway, what it does is the bank pays the premiums to basically insure your money in those accounts. Now, when they open up this program, the federal government would basically protect $5,000 of your money in the banks. Nowadays, it's $250,000. And the way that works is, let's say you have more than $250,000. What do? Well, you have to open up an account with another bank, not in another account in the same bank, another account in another bank, and put your money in there. All right. So, and by the way, if you have more than $250,000 in your bank account, you need to become my newest best friend. Okay. But anyway, so basically what this is going to do is it's going to cause people to have confidence in the bank. It's a security blanket, right? I mean, it's a little blankie for all the Americans that have money in their banks, because the fact they know that if the bank goes under, their money can still be insured. There's also going to be some changes in protecting people's investments in stocks and bonds. In 1933, Congress will pass the Truth in Securities Act. What this called for was corporations that issued stock to the public give full and fair disclosure of their conditions. All right? This was to allow people to know what they were investing in. Perhaps more important was the fact that we have the Security Exchanges Act, passed in 1934. It created the federal regulation of the stock market. Who called that for originally? Do you remember? Oh yeah, that was Teddy Roosevelt back in 1908. Now, I ask again, does a regulatory agency that regulates the buying and selling of stocks change the nature of private ownership, the nature of the system? Of course not. And by the way, the first head of the SEC was going to be our friend Joseph Kennedy. The point is that Joseph Kennedy was a stock market pirate. So who best to deal with the stock market crooks than the best of them all? Now, was this a socialist measure to make Joseph Kennedy the head of this agency? Hardly. The point of this is that FDR is dealing with the banking crisis immediately. And then you have reforms in banking and in finance to try and prevent the problems that led to the Great Depression. The New Deal also had to deal with unemployment. We can never be quite certain about how many people were unemployed, but we do know that anywhere between 12 and 15 million people are unemployed. That's basically an unemployment rate of 25 to 33%. Something needed to be done, and done in a hurry. So the New Deal employed all kinds of actions, and I want to make some distinctions here. First, there had to be some emergency relief. Remember all those people that were just starving in the streets of this country? Well, Congress will pass the first Federal Emergency Relief Act in 1933. It appropriated $500 million and gave it to the states to hand out to the unemployed. There's a name for this type of relief. It's called the dole. It's basically when people line up and you hand them money. Now, this is a great deal more complicated than what I'm making it, but essentially Congress takes a huge chunk of money and gave it to the states to be distributed amongst the unemployed. This is not very American, isn't it? In America, we have something called a work ethic. And according to it, you basically have to do something in order to get something, right? The Roosevelt administration was not very comfortable with the dole, but they did it because the situation was so critical. They immediately began to look for other methods to provide relief, and they found some very imaginative ones. And if you will, these are going to be more American. And I'll give you a few more in our next video.